welcome back to the Stick 'em Up podcast. We got a very off-season coded episode for you guys today. I'm not sure if we do have any news. I know there's been a little bit around the league, but we have a couple of lists to dissect here today that we have spent the last better part of 2 hours, 2.5 hours each coming up with that we're going to go into. Brundi, do you want to break down how we're going to do this?
All right. First of all, this was your idea, which it's a good idea, and it saved me from having to think of something. So basically, what we're doing is we each have a position. We've got like the 4 different categories by position. So, Braden, you have wingers in general, whether it's left or right. I have defense. And basically what we did is we made a top 20 list of players from the time of 2010 to the present. So over that span of, 14 years, who's the best 20 in the respective positions we got. So does that make sense? That makes sense, right?
Yeah, I think that sums it up pretty good. And I was going to explain it, but it felt so weird. Usually I almost always start the podcast by like leading you into talking about something. And I was like, it felt weird to jump right into me explaining something without you getting a word in there. But
hey, no, that's totally fine. Yeah. Like we said, this is off-season content. There's like really no news happening around the league right now. That's kind of why we took Monday off and said, we'll just wait a week because we were hoping something would happen, and we still have nothing. So this is what we're doing to keep giving you guys something to listen to, considering that, again, there's nothing. So this is our way of still keeping active here. So what do you want to do? Your list or my list? What are we feeling? I'll let you pick.
Oh, well,
who wants to get embarrassed first?
When you're building a team, you got to build from the net out. We didn't do goalies this time, but the defense is the next closest.
All right. Throwing me into the fire first here.
There's no expectations for the first one, though. Once you set the bar, I got to go against that.
That is true. And again, this is, just our lists and kind of a last minute idea. Really, so we might be missing some guys, or maybe our lists are actually really good in terms of how you guys see it. So I guess just starting off to rattle off some honorable mentions. Again, this is from 2010 to now. Honorable mentions, I have Mike Green, Dougie Hamilton, Cam Fowler, Ryan McDonough, Quinn Hughes, Adam Fox, Aaron Ekblad, Jonas Brodin, and John Klingberg.
Wow, there's some big names there.
Yeah, and right, that's why I had to put that honorable mention in there, because it's like, there's so many guys that are good, but
I think I have more honorable mentions than that. Actually, I definitely have more honorable mentions than that.
You have more?
Yeah. I've got so many honorable mentions. I have them categorized, but we'll get to mine afterwards.
Holy shit. All right. This one will make you very happy. We're starting off with 20. We'll go all the way up to 1. So this one will make you
You're starting at number 1.
No, I'm starting at 20 and I'm working my way up to 1.
Oh, okay. I thought you said you're starting at 1. I was like, you gotta tease him a little bit.
Yeah, I was gonna say, you don't start with the climax.
Of course.
This is the foreplay of the list right now. All right.
Some people do foreplay afterwards. I don't agree with it.
Okay. You know what? Yeah, so we'll start off nice and simple here. Number 20, I have Morgan Riley. 472 points. That is 16th in terms of defensemen since in that time span. I mean, that's really it. Like, he doesn't have any team awards or individual awards or anything. Like, it's just he's been a really good defenseman. For him, his entire career. So, and again, he puts up good number of points, so had to go with Morgan Riley there.
Yeah, I like that pick. He's one of those guys. It's hard to guess who's going to be around that 20 mark. Like, obviously,
Yeah.
we both know a lot about hockey and stuff, right? But we purposefully set this all up as you doing defense and me doing wingers, and we don't do both, so that I
Yeah.
have no idea what number 20 is going to look like on the defense side. Just like you probably have no idea the caliber of player that's going to be
Yeah,
around 20.
I got no idea.
Because it's over 14 years. That's such a random time that
Yeah.
it'll be tough.
Exactly, right?
But that's really interesting. He's not a guy that I would have really thought of, but at the same time, I mean, he's obviously been elite for almost his entire career. He's like jumped right in and got to that level, and he's I mean, he's always been solid. Do you have his like single season high in stats? I don't know if you have his like season by season stats or just a lump sum of his points
Yeah,
over the time.
I don't have his whole like
Oh, okay.
like individual like written down, but his season high was in 2018-2019. That season he had 72 points in 82 games. 20
Like 72. Like that's I know you see guys like, the Quinn Hughes and Makars of the world now, but like those are the top of the league guys, and that's now. Like back then, obviously that was, 5 years ago, but 70 plus points as a defenseman is, that's pretty elite company.
Yeah. And I mean, it's not worth much because the team as a whole really hasn't had much success in the playoffs, but he's been a great playoff guy too for Toronto. So
Yeah,
gives him a little
absolutely.
bump over some other guys.
Oh yeah.
Number 19, I have Keith Yandel. 557 points. That's ninth among defensemen since 2010. Yeah, just in his prime, he was a really solid, great defenseman. Like,
yeah. When did he retire?
and he had a sick Ironman streak too. Fucking gnarly Ironman streak.
Of course.
I think he retired 2 years ago.
That recently.
Yeah,
I would have thought it was
because he was with Florida, and then no, because he was with Florida, and then he kind of got just dumped off in Philly, and then he just had 1 year of that, and I was like, yeah, man, I'm done.
He didn't want to keep going and playing that torch style.
You know, like the best season of his career was his fourth last season, coming in 2018-19 with Florida. He put up 62 points, so best offensive season at least. Worth noting, his last year in the league, he was a minus 47 with the Flyers.
Oh,
so
classic.
That's why he's only 19. No, he's one of those guys that you could argue should be on the list or is, but
yeah, I can see it. But consistency is an underrated skill to have in the National Hockey League,
especially
honestly.
as a defenseman too.
Yeah, especially as a defenseman dealing with all the forecheck coming in and shot blocking and all that. So it's insane that being a defenseman, he had the Iron Man streak that he had.
Yeah, right. Remember, was it him that there's like the outrage when he was going to be a healthy scratch?
Yeah, people were super upset when they wanted to healthy scratch him, and then also with Phil Kessel, that was coming up again as well.
Oh yeah. All right, moving on. This is I'm the more I look at it, I'm not sure if 18 makes sense for him. But we that's why we hit record so we couldn't change it. At 18, I have Brent Seabrook.
Brent Seabrook. I mean, 3 Stanley Cups does a lot.
But
that does a lot for
that's true. Yeah. Yeah. The big part was 3 Stanley Cups, 350 points in that time span. I don't know exactly what number that puts him amongst. I think that's about 30th. But he was a great two-way defenseman, almost more maybe. defensive than offensive, but
Yeah,
nonetheless.
he was definitely really strong defensively to kind of help out guys like Duncan Keith and Jalmerson on
Yeah.
that Blackhawks team. And there's something to be said for, really good defensive defensemen. I'm curious to see how many defensive defensemen crack your list because, I mean, over 14 years, top 20, it's, a lot of offensive defensemen, a lot of two-way guys, but guys who are really just shut down, it's I can't imagine there's much more than two more on your list at most. If that.
It depends because there's certain guys that like when we get to them, I'll be like, what would you consider them? Would you consider them like an elite two-way guy, more offensive, or like can chip in offensively, but we're like one of the best in their own end. So
Yeah.
Number 17, the youngest player I have on this list. I have Cale Makar.
Right. Of course.
One Stanley Cup. He's got a Calder. He's got a Norris. He's got a Conn Smythe, which is huge. The Conn Smythe is really what put him on this list, I think. Because it's not very often you see a defenseman win a Conn Smythe trophy, and so that puts him already like in a short amount of time that much higher over quite a few other guys.
Yeah. Yeah, I completely agree. And I was wondering how soon he would show up once you said that Quinn Hughes was an honorable mention.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that Conn Smythe is massive. Like winning a cup is huge, and having a playoff MVP is even bigger for an individual. So it makes a lot of sense to be on
the thing
list.
is with Quinn Hughes, though, is like, yeah, he has that Norris now, but like this year was like the first year where he's reaching, his full potential, or he's even got more to go. Whereas kind of the years before it was like, okay, he's really, really good, but it's like, you're kind of waiting for that. Like people would kind of talk about him and Makar, and it's like, okay, but Makar's taken that next step. Has Hughes yet? And Hughes just did it now, whereas
Yeah.
Makar, we've got it for multiple seasons now. So that was kind of the biggest thing. Number 16, here's for sure one of the defensive defensemen. I have Marc-Edouard Vlasic. 300 points in that time span, not a lot, but the back half of his career, not great, but in his prime, he was, you could argue the best defensive defenseman in the league, mostly kind of during that, 2013 to 18, kind of pushing 19. Like in that time, he was just one of the best, if not the best, in his own end.
Yeah, he was really good at shutting guys down. I was wondering when we were talking about defense a second ago if he would be on the list and where he would be for defensive defenseman. I don't know if I see another defensive defenseman through that time being on this list. I don't know how long. I didn't look at the stats. I was looking at stuff for wingers. I don't know how long Slavin's been going or guys like Tanev, but I don't know if Tanev was at that level. But yeah, Edward Vlasic was incredible for his prime, and his prime was longer than I think people remember. It's really easy to be like, oh, he's, look how long he's been a boat anchor, and it's like, well, so his contracts look bad for, 4 years, but like before that, like even if his contract didn't look good before then, he was still providing a ton of value to that San Jose team, and a big part of why they ended up going to the finals in, what was it, 2016?
2017.
17.
No, 16. Yeah, you're right. Never mind.
So yeah, I do like that pick for the list.
Yeah. I had a thought. I'm just and one of the other things with Vlasic also is like you kind of look at when he started to not be that elite defensive guy is kind of when the Sharks started to go on that down spiral after the 2019 18-19 season, and so he never really had a good partner beside him. He never was playing with Brent Burns. He was always playing with some of the younger guys or unexperienced guys and trying to elevate them. Whereas it's like, So naturally, a guy's going to kind of slip when they're not having a competent player beside him. And if you say that's not true, look at Quinn Hughes. I mean, reached that next level, and we know what he's at now when he has a great defenseman beside him in Philip Hronek. So, or even
Yeah.
Cale Makar with Devon Toews. Like,
Yeah, who knows how if he would have broken out the way he did and as soon as he did without a guy who can, anchor him a bit like that. So
yeah,
it's it you know it you don't have to be playing with somebody else that is like insanely elite, but you need somebody with good chemistry and at the end of the day, a guy who can at least be like a top 4 defenseman or something, right? Like you need a
mhm,
guy who's like, actually good. Like there's some guys that you look back and it's like they had good careers, but man, if he wasn't stuck playing with a guy who would be the 4th best defenseman on most teams, this guy
yeah,
could have been massive. So,
yeah, exactly right. Moving on, number 15, I have, funny enough, the only player on this list who has been bought out twice. I have Ryan Suter. Um,
oh, okay.
again, not
Yeah, yeah.
looking at the last couple years, but during the majority of this time spent in his prime, he was one of the best in the league. That's why he got priced out of Nashville. It's why he earned that, well, maybe it's a bit much, maybe a bit of an overpay, but like he earned a big deal, which he got with Minnesota, and 565 points. That's good for 10th on this list, which is kind of surprising actually that he was 10th in terms of defense on here, but
Actually, like because Ryan Suter's a bit more of a defensive defenseman, maybe not as much as a guy like Vlasic, but he's a two-way forward, but a lot more defensively minded than
yeah, exactly,
than
right?
a lot of elite defensemen are.
He was
So
one of those guys that I kind of thought of that. Like he wasn't a stay-at-home defensive defenseman, but he was a defense guy, but he chipped in a bit more offensively.
yeah, definitely a lot more than I would have thought.
Yeah, right. At number 14, now retired somehow, PK Subban
Mm.
won Norris Trophy, 467 points during that span. That's good for 18th. Like in his prime, Montreal, and then kind of a little bit with Nashville. Like he was,
Yeah, for that first 1 or 2 years in
you know,
Nashville, he was
he
he was
he he
still
was
pretty
he was a
solid.
beast. And having a Norris Trophy helps on this list because there's
I
only
I'm almost
14 given out during that
surprised.
time.
I'm almost surprised that he only has one. Like I know it's insanely hard to win a Norris Trophy year in year out, right? But
Yeah.
there was a good 3 4 year period where it really felt like it was hard for many defensemen to emulate what Subban was doing on the ice.
Yeah. 100%. I think he's definitely deserving to be on this list. And again, it's one of those guys that's so weird being like, man, he was so good, and then all of a sudden it seemed like his drop off like was quick.
Yeah.
And then it got to the point where it's like he's retiring when he's, you know, 33 or whatever. And it's like, man, thought we were gonna have, more years of Subban, or maybe seeing him, try and chase a cup or something. And, that's kind of why his retirement just came out of nowhere. But
Yeah, a lot of those elite guys, they really push it. They really want that cup. So it was almost strange to see him retire so early. Like I remember
yeah,
the offseason that he retired. I was that offseason in particular, I was sitting there like, man, if Tampa signs him in the offseason for like, even like, 2 or 3 mil, I was like, I would love that so much for us. And I was kind of hoping for it. I wasn't like waiting for it, but I was hoping and seeing where he would sign. And all of a sudden he's just, I'm done. And I was like, oh,
yeah,
I mean, fair enough, but yeah,
yeah,
he really could have been a bit higher if he kept going, but at the end of the day, he had an insanely good career, made a ton of money, and he's also a pretty kick-ass personality for the NHL going forward.
yeah, 100%. Number 13, again, this is another guy that I think, kind of Left the league when I think he still had a lot of gas left in the tank. And that is Dustin Byfuglien. He has one Stanley Cup right at the very start, 2010. In that time span, he's 23rd among defensemen. But here's the thing, 450 points, but it was done in 691 games. Like, Byfuglien was...
Wow.
Yeah. Like, and you know, the physicality he brought, the leadership, like, especially the physicality. Jeez.
Yeah, I mean, he was the scariest guy in the NHL for a solid bit there. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know there's much an argument you can make for anyone else for a good 5-year period at least. Like, maybe if Chara
right?
got really upset at you, but that's about it.
Yeah. And it was just the hits Byfuglien did, and when you've got a defenseman who's that big but can score some of the goals he did and set up plays as well as hitting guys and fighting and whatnot, like, it was so fun watching him play. So I think he's more than deserving of the 13th spot. At 12, I have Mark Giordano.
At what is it? Sorry, 12? You said
This is 12. 12, yeah. 542
Okay.
points. That's good for 11th. And he's got a Norris Trophy in 2019.
Yeah. I feel like a lot of people forget that, but yeah, Giordano won a Norris Trophy. Like,
out of like nowhere.
he was like, I mean, how old was he when he won that? Like 37, 38?
No.
No?
I think it probably would have been about because what's he now? Is he he's 40 now. So he would have been 34?
Oh,
35?
okay.
35?
35
still,
still
I mean,
35 still 35 pretty old
and you're
to win a
35
Norris,
you're
but
winning a Norris, like, especially for it to be his first one. Like, you'd maybe expect it from, some of the other guys that'll be higher on this list when they've already won a couple and they're just maintaining their elite level status, whereas Giordano is kind of I don't want to say necessarily like a full-on late bloomer, but also like kind of.
he would have been a dark horse for sure if you picked him that year to win.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it there. Number 11, I have John Carlson. 675 points. That is good for 6. In this time period, and he's also got a Stanley Cup in 2018 with the Capitals.
Yeah, and there's a lot of guys that spring to mind immediately when you talk about an offensive defenseman. But John Carlson is always up there for me because he really is that prototypical offensive defenseman of, like, obviously his defensive game has flaws, but you didn't draft him, you didn't sign him, you didn't trade for him, you don't play him for that. You play him so that he can put up 70 to 80 points on the blue line.
Yeah, he can quarterback a power play as good
Yeah.
as the best in the league. Like, that's what he does.
And he's done it for a very long time as well. So
yeah,
it
he's
makes
always
a lot of sense he's
maintained
up there.
an elite status from the moment he reached it all the way through. Now he's maintained it. Number 10, I have Brent Burns. He's got a Norris Trophy in 2017, 716 points. That is good for 3rd. And I do have an asterisk beside this because there were small stints where he did jump up to forward, but he also has the most goals at 198. But again, he did have a little bit of time up on forward, but also, still you could argue even taking off some goals, still the best, just pure goal score of a defenseman, within the last 10 years or so.
I think that's very arguable for sure. And we'll definitely talk about that a little bit more when we get to my list. No, I'm kidding. I don't have Burns as a winger.
You could have. No. I think he only had
that would have been fun.
1 year, and I think it was like the year after, or like had that weird like lockout that went till like January or whatever.
Oh yeah, I think that was that 2011?
12, 13.
Oh yeah, I think it was closer to 13.
or something like that. But yeah, so it was kind of like that where he got a stint on forward, and it worked out okay. But it was like, yeah, no, he's better off as a defenseman. Number 9, I have Chris Letang, 690 points. That's good for 4th. 2 Stanley Cups, although I do have an asterisk beside the 2017 one because he didn't play in the playoffs at all and played about half the regular season. So he's technically got 2 cups,
Right.
but it's also, he really only kind of played through one playoff run to win it. But
Yeah,
again, kind of another guy like a John Carlson, that
which is kind of crazy that they went back to
offensive
back.
defenseman guy.
They went back to back one of those times without like their
Their
biggest
best
defenseman, their
defenseman.
best
Their-
defenseman.
yeah, he was their top guy.
So that's pretty crazy for them. But yeah, he's been so consistently good throughout his career. He's had not horrendous injury problems, but every once in a while they pop up and they're really bad, like that playoffs injury. So
Yeah,
he's definitely played enough games that it's not one of those like what could have been scenarios.
exactly.
But he's one of those guys that was very similar to one of his best buddies and his captain, Sidney Crosby.
Yeah.
They did just fine, but if they were healthy the full way, what more would they have done?
Yeah. Also worth noting with Chris Letang, the 2016 Cup, he did have the game-winning goal as well. So that's pretty cool there as well.
Yeah, I mean, Stanley Cup game-winning goal. That's pretty big. Like people talk about, winning cups is important and stuff. I mean, doesn't get more winning the cup than putting it in yourself, especially as a defenseman.
Yeah, for sure. Number 8, I have Roman Josi, 686 points. That's good for 5th. Won Norris Trophy in 2020. I put should be 2 because I still think, not this past season, but the season before, when we first started the podcast, I thought Roman Josi should have won that year. But won Norris Trophy. Again, one of those guys that has just been
He's
such a
been
top guy
so
for
solid.
so long. Yeah.
Yeah, and I really think that he's still underrated. I think people are finally understanding how good he is, but he's been maybe not this level of good, but he's been really, really elite for at least a decade now. Like he's been so
Yeah.
good. So I'm glad that people are finally giving him his flowers because for when he won his Norris Trophy and a couple years afterwards, there was a lot of people being like, "Oh, okay, he did his thing, but like, he's not really that guy, but like, and maybe it's because he plays on I don't really want to use the term irrelevant Nashville team, but like, one of those middling teams that, is never bottoming out. It never really going for the cup past that, I want to say 2017 finals run.
I get what you mean.
They're not one of the big name teams. They fall into that Minnesota category a bit. So
Yeah.
I'm glad people are recognizing
exactly.
them now.
Yeah. Number 7, I have Alex Pietrangelo, 603 points. That puts him at 8th, and 2 Stanley Cups. Captaining. Oh no, he was the captain for St. Louis. So captain the Blues to Stanley Cup as well, and then obviously with Vegas.
Yeah, I'm curious. Did you put him higher than Yossi because of the cups?
No, more so the fact that like Pietrangelo has been, maybe Yossi's, has a higher peak and he's just reached it, but Pietrangelo's been so solid and such a strong two-way guy over that, over that span. So, obviously less points, but I think in his prime, he definitely had the edge in the defensive game.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's
So
a lot
kind of
more
it was
of
one
a
of those
two-way
ones
forward
where,
versus offensive defenseman.
yeah,
Or two-way
I could
defenseman.
kind of, you could kind of flip-flop him back and forth. But I was like, you know what? Yeah, I mean, he was just in his prime. Like, I think he's kind of on the back end of his prime, but like in his prime, he was just a phenomenal two-way defenseman that it was huge in St. Louis winning the cup the year that they did.
Yeah. Yeah. He was absolutely massive to that. And I'm still surprised they let him walk because he just went to free agency, right?
Yeah. Yeah. The
Like,
year after they won the cup.
like and he's not old. It certainly wasn't back then. Like, I don't know why they didn't move somebody to make the cap space for him. Like,
Yeah. Like you just won the cup and then you lose him. It's like, man, like, yeah, that's especially your captain. Like that's just so tough.
yeah, yeah, you can make a bit of a comparison with the Stamkos situation this offseason, but like, at least you can see what the GM's trying to do, like moving towards the future. And Stamkos is aging. Pietrangelo was what, if I had to guess, 28, 29 at the time?
He's probably more around 30, 31.
How old is he now? He's been there a few
Um,
years.
Was he 30? Yeah, 34. And he's been with Vegas for,
Okay.
yeah, so 30, yeah. So won the cup, had one more year with the Blues, and then, yeah, you lose him. Like that's brutal. But
Yeah.
number 6, again,
Yeah.
another guy that I
Good
think,
pick.
we're always kind of wondering what if he had a little more time because, we just saw phenomenal play from him, and then that was it. Shea Weber, 466 points.
Mm.
That's got him kind of pretty low down the list. But again, we're talking about a guy that was just fantastic in his own end. We're always going to talk about the great slap shot that he had.
Of course.
But again, just a guy that still could put up points and one of the best leaders of all time. And like great in his own end, like a great all around defenseman that, you build a team around basically. Well, not
Yeah.
basically, you do. Like,
Yeah. I mean, like, him and Carey Price basically almost alone tried to drag the Canadians to a Stanley Cup in 2021.
yeah.
Like,
Yeah, basically the two of them.
and they were, and neither of them really ever like played another game. I think Carey Price played a handful more games, but like they were carrying that team, not just in effort, but in actual like results. And
Yeah.
while they were doing that, they were so injured that they were basically done afterwards. So like that just shows how good when healthy Shea Weber was. Like even
Yeah.
when he's a shell of his former self, he's putting up results.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Top 5 here. Top 5.
We're in the top 5.
At number 5, I have Big Z, Zdeno Chara. 361 points. Again, when we're talking about Chara, we're not exactly talking about his offensive game. And he does have a Stanley Cup in 2011 with the Bruins. Again, Chara is one of those guys that like I kind of think he's more so, like elite defensive defenseman.
Yeah, he's
Like
one of
he
those
was a
guys that's
guy that
kind of
could
a two-way
chip an
a
offense a little
two-way
bit.
defenseman / defensive defenseman. He's kind of bordering in there a bit.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's one of those guys that I think is probably an elite defensive defenseman, but he's so elite that, he ends up being good in the other end as well.
Yeah. And in his prime he was like one of the top guys in the league. Like all around, and he just I don't think got talked about enough because he just wasn't putting up the same number of like points as a bunch of other guys. But like with what his job was and what he was going out there to do, nobody did it better than him in his prime, and he did it for so long too.
Yeah, long ass time.
Number 4, I kind of wish I had him a bit higher, but I couldn't justify putting him any higher
than number 4.
No. Oh yeah, the guy. Yeah. Drew Doughty. Norris Trophy in 2016, 2 Stanley Cups with the Kings, and 642 points.
642. That's quite a bit higher than a lot of the other numbers you've said.
Yeah. He was pretty high up there. I'm just trying to pull up what rank that was 7th among defensemen in that time.
Yeah, that's like
Like he was like,
yeah,
I mean, he kind of had
still
a weird.
logs
He's one
a
of those
lot of
weird
points.
guys. It's like he, was coming up. He hit his prime. He was so good, and then he kind of went on like a little bit of a slump for a couple years, and now he's back up to being like a top stud again. But like in his prime during the 2010s, uh, he was so good. He was so good and so fun to watch, and he made everyone around him better just by him being on the ice.
Yeah, and like we said, like you just said, he's still putting up great numbers. He's also logging a lot of minutes. I think we talked about it a bit on the podcast back when we were doing the current coverage of the playoffs, but like he was putting up like 26, 27, 28 minutes a night against Edmonton in the first round this year.
Yeah,
Like they still rely on him heavily, and he's
yeah,
obviously has in the past shows signs of slowing down, but it doesn't really look like he's going to quite yet.
yeah. No, I think he's still got more. He's still got gas left in the tank, and um, again, it's like I put him at 4, and I'm like, man, I feel like I should have him higher, but I can't justify having him higher than the other 3 that are remaining.
Yeah.
Um, Number 3, I have Victor Hedman, 728 points. That is second among defensemen in that time. 2 Stanley Cups. He's got a Norris in 2018. Got a Conn Smythe in 2020. Like now,
He
this is a guy that's like a elite, like a franchise 2-way defenseman.
yeah. Yeah, whenever people talk about a true two-way defender, he's obviously as a Lightning fan, he's the first guy that comes to mind every time. He's great at quarterbacking a power play. Uh, Nobody bullies him off the puck. Like he's just so solid. He's one of those guys that is elite because he's so rarely fucks up, and he's so solid in every area of his game. Like there's a
Yeah,
couple areas where he's in particular really elite, but there's not an area where he isn't elite.
yeah,
Like he really does it all.
exactly, exactly. Like again, he's just that franchise defenseman. Like he's he's got the team awards, he's got the individual awards. His game speaks for itself. Um,
That
yeah,
that Conn Smythe run was crazy as
yeah,
well. I believe third most goals in a single postseason run for a defenseman in
yeah.
NHL history.
He went like nuts there. Um, Number 2, I have Eric Carlson, 817 points. That puts him number 1 among defensemen in that time. 3 Norris trophies, which is kind of why I gave him the 2 over Hedman, because I mean, like 3 Norris trophies. Um,
Yeah,
there's no one else on the
there's
list that
there's
has
not a
that.
lot, and there's not a lot of
Um,
guys in history who have that. Like
yeah,
if I had to guess, doing a head count, 3? No, 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 no. That's more than 3. Probably like 5.
yeah. Off the top of my head, I wouldn't know, but I think probably around there makes the most sense. But yeah, 2012, 2015, and then 2023, and he also had a 100-point season on a really, really, really bad team. So
Yeah,
having 100 points as a defenseman is again the only guy on this list who's done that.
yeah, and there's a reason for that. Like it just really does not happen in this day and age. Might start
Yeah,
happening again sometime soon with scoring going up, but
I think we'll see it pretty soon, probably. I think so.
I think so in the next 2-3 years, maybe.
Uh, I'll give you one guess on who number 1 is.
So after you said Drew Doughty, I was sitting here thinking, okay, so obviously Hedman and Carlson, and I was trying to think of the other guy, and then especially after you said Carlson, I was like, okay, so now I can't remember the guy who's number 1 until I remembered. I don't believe you have said Duncan Keith yet.
You would be correct. It is Duncan Keith. Conn Smythe again is huge for a defenseman. He's only one of a handful on this list that's got that. 518 points. That puts him 12th among defensemen. 3 Stanley Cups, and 2 Norris trophies. Like, he's got a lot of team hardware and a lot of individual hardware. And again, in his prime, like, he was, the back end of that Chicago team. Like, I think he again, kind of like what I said with Drew Doughty, he elevated everybody around him. And in his prime, like, in what he did, what kind of player he was, there was nobody better than him. So,
yeah, and it's actually really interesting. We'll get to it with my list in a bit, but your top 3 feels very similar to mine in that it's 3 guys that feel like they're a little bit above everyone else. Even that number 4 spot, they have a couple more individual trophies, especially some Conn Smythes in there. And I think they're with my top 3 for wingers and your top 3 for defensemen. I don't think you can come up with a wrong answer for the order of those 3. Like,
yeah.
I think my top 3 personally, and I mean, there's a little bias in there, but I would probably have Hedman and then Carlson, Keith. But like, I think any way you slice it. I think Hedman was so reliable for so long, and the Conn Smythe is so massive. Obviously, Keith also has one, but when we're talking about the past 14 years, Keith also hasn't played for a few years, so he kind of loses some points, some games played there. But
I was going.
I don't know.
I do get what you're saying. I do, and I think I don't think I would budge from moving Keith off. 1, like, because Hedman's Norris run or Conn Smythe was incredible, but Keith was also very. I could maybe get behind the argument of like moving Hedman above Carlson.
I think there's definitely an argument for Hedman.
I mean, it's just like
he's had
such a
4 Stanley Cup final runs in that time. He's been nominated for the Norris like 7 or 8 times. Like,
yeah, I have no idea about the nominees for any of these guys, but
either way, I think
I do agree with what you're saying.
You can argue a couple of spots here and there, but I do think that is a really solid top 20 overall. I think there's like, you could move a couple of guys up a few spots, but I think in general you got everyone pretty much nailed position wise.
And yeah, it's basically like what you said. It's like you're kind of throwing 4 to 20 together, but it's like those top 3 are your top 3, but you can kind of move them anywhere you want, but you can't move any of those top 3 guys out of the top 3. Like those are the 3.
I don't think Drew Doughty's passing any of those guys, and I think who were your 4, 5, 6? Was that Doughty, Pietrangelo, Yossi?
Doughty, Chara, and then Weber.
Doughty, Chara, Weber. Like, I can see arguments for moving some of those guys around, like, but yeah, I think it would be a lot of swapping guys, not like bumping a guy down 5 spots or anything. So
yeah, exactly.
I think that's solid.
Hey, we will take that. We'll take that. But yeah, so that's defensemen. Let us know if you agree or disagree with any of those.
Did you take playoff stats into account that much? Did you look at those really?
Not a whole lot. When I was kind of doing like the nitpicking between a couple guys, like I was kind of looking at it a bit, but overall I was kind of going off just their whole overall play. Like, I wasn't really weighing playoffs as, a big chunk of it or anything.
Oh, okay. I was just curious because I know, a lot of people just glance at things, but they don't look at playoff stats. And I think, especially with some of the guys I picked, we'll get to it. But I feel like more than the average person when doing something like this, I definitely take playoff stats into account, not just, Conn Smythes and cups, but just their stats. Like, if they're a guy that just absolutely turns it on in the playoffs, like, that's huge for a team.
Well, and like I said, that is why I kind of gave Morgan Riley that bump into the 20 spot there was, because like I mentioned, his playoff, the way he kind of is already a good defenseman, but like kind of hits that next level come playoff time. is why I kind of gave him the edge over some other guys, whereas they just kind of stay the same. They don't, you don't see that next level when it's the playoffs.
And yeah, it's just important to take that into account. And we'll get to that with my number 20th here on our top 20 wingers. As we were pressing record on the podcast to start, I was like trying to move some players around, and then I was like, nope, I'm not moving these guys. I just gotta deal with my list. And then partway through, I decided to mix one up because I just decided
last second substitution. All right,
last second substitution. But before we get into the top 20, we got a couple honorable mentions. So just a couple of them here. TJ Oshie, Jordan Eberle, David Perron, Chris Kreider, Patrick Marleau, Philip Forsberg, Marty St. Louis with an Art Ross and 3 Lady Bings, Mark Stone with a Stanley Cup, Max Pacioretty, Daniel Sedin with an Art Ross, Zach Parise, Jakub Voracek, and Andre Palat. I also have a honorable mentions highlighted as too soon to be included. So these guys would probably be there if we did this again in a couple of years, 4 or 5 years. But right now, they just don't have the sample size to make it. Those guys being Jason Robertson, Kirill Kaprizov, who won the Calder, Kyle Connor with a Lady Bing, Jonathan Marchessault with a Conn Smythe and a Stanley Cup, and Jake Gensel with 2 Stanley Cups.
Fox. Some of those guys. Wow.
I did not think guys that caliber were going to be left out.
Jeez, okay.
Right before we went live,
Wow.
Zach Parise and Jakub Voracek got taken out.
Okay. All right, I'm curious. I'm curious to see how this goes, and I'm curious to see who's cracking the top, 15 to 20 here, and who bumps some of those guys out.
And some of those guys, like Marty St. Louis, Daniel Sedin, like they were very solidly elite still at this point from 2010 to I want to say till like 2016 for St. Louis until like 2018 for Sedin, but there just wasn't enough sample size there, and the hot level play wasn't quite high enough to crack the list, even though both of them had an Art Ross. So, but
yeah.
Moving on to number 20, and this is what we were talking about with playoffs mattering. At number 20, I have Justin Williams with 1 Conn Smythe and 2 Stanley Cups. Dude had pretty solid numbers throughout his career. From 2010 onward, he had 477 points in 761 games, 195 goals. But you don't bring Justin Williams onto your team for regular season stats. You bring him on for the playoffs. And this dude was an absolute animal in the playoffs, including that Conn Smythe year where he had, I think it was 25 points in 24 games or something like that.
25 and 26.
25 and 26. Like he was absolutely nuts. He goes from being around a half point per game player, a little bit more like 0.55, 0.6 points per game in the regular season, to being a point per game guy and a Conn Smythe winner in the playoffs. Like that's those guys come around like only a few in a generation that can just elevate their play in the playoffs. And there's a reason people call him Mr. Game 7. Like he's just got that clutch gene in him. And just the amount of times he did it and the Conn Smythe, the cups, I couldn't leave him off the list.
Yeah, no, you know what? You broke it down perfect. That's a phenomenal pick to have at 20 there. I got no complaints.
Yeah, I think everyone other than him, there's a bit of a increase from here to the level of play, but I think his playoff performances really just forced him onto the list.
Yeah.
At number 19, I have Vladimir Tarasenko, who has now 2 Stanley Cups to his name. He was the other one that I swapped on like as we started recording, because he just scored so many goals so consistently. Like he had how many like 30 goal seasons? Like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. He's got 6 30-goal seasons, including a 40-goal season. He's got.
Well, it's also like during his prime
when you points.
Like during his prime, when you talked about like nowadays, and you're like, oh, who's the best? Like, you talk about like, oh, is McDavid a top 5 goal scorer in the league? When you talk in Tarasenko's prime, he was without a doubt in that top 5. Like when you're talking about the best guys at ripping the puck and putting it in, like he was always, one of the first guys mentioned.
Yeah.
So,
he was.
Yeah, I think he's more than deserving of being on this list.
Yeah, and he's done it so consistently. Like I know he's dropped off a little bit in the last 2 years. 18 goals, 23 goals. He still had 50
That's
points
so
and
decent,
55
though,
points
like,
last year. Like
yeah,
he's not a shell of his former self, and we're only 2 seasons removed from 34 goals and 82 points in 75 games.
yeah.
So, and that one was with St. Louis. The
year.
past 2 years, I believe he played with different teams in both those years. So I think he's had like 4 teams in 2 years now.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a very good pick to have there.
So we go from 2 guys who have a lot of time in the league to a guy who has not been in the league for near as long, but his numbers were good enough to get him on the list. There's a couple other guys who haven't played as long who are higher than him because they've played more games even than him. But at 18, I have Matthew Tkachuk.
I was wondering where you're going to have him on this list.
For a bit, I had him in the honorable mentions category. He moved on and off a couple times, but because, there's some other guys who have a low amount of games played, which for this is around, 600, 700, maybe 750. But Matthew Tkachuk only has 590 games played so far in his NHL career. But he has 579 points plus 133. And he's showed up in the playoffs often when it matters, and that's a big part of it. And they won the cup this year. He doesn't have a Conn Smythe, but both those playoff runs with the Panthers, he was absolutely massive for them. So it's hard to deny him, even with that smaller sample size.
And especially a guy like you mentioned, his points and whatnot is absurd. But when it's also a guy that's going out there and constantly delivering the body every night, he's stirring it up, drawing penalties, may take some dumb penalties, but he draws a hell of a lot of penalties. Like, again, it's a guy that just goes out there and does it all.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's, again, not a huge sample size compared to other guys, but in that sample size, yeah.
Yeah, and I believe he is the guy on my list that has played the least amount of games in this time period.
Okay.
I am like 90% sure of that.
All right.
Another guy who has played not a ton of games, who comes in at number. Oh nope, I was skipping a number. At number 17, a guy who has played a decent amount of games actually. Taylor Hall. Yeah,
Okay.
Taylor Hall with a 1 Hart Trophy, notoriously. He's put up really solid numbers just for so many seasons. I'm trying to pull him up. For some reason, I don't have his tab here when I had everyone else's. But yeah, he just put up great numbers, even after quite a few trades. Like, he went from Edmonton to New Jersey and then to the Coyotes, where eventually he finally started dropping off a bit. But he really just, like, with a bunch of different teammates, a whole different cast every time, was still putting up solid numbers. His Hart-winning year, he had 39 goals, 93 points. He has 697 points. Sorry?
Like, the year he won the Hart, like, he drug that New Jersey team into the playoffs. Obviously, they went out round 1. I think it was to Tampa Bay. But, like, and he's also one of those guys that, like, when you look at his career, like, he's went to a lot of teams that have gotten, like, when you, like, look back and, like, oh, Edmonton, McDavid, Draisaitl, like, oh, New Jersey, Jack Hughes and XYZ that they got there. It's like Taylor Hall never really played much with any of those guys. Like, he never really had, like, a top...
No, he hasn't.
Like, 15, maybe even top 20 centerman in the league, playing with him on the first line of the team he was on. Like, he was kind of having to carry the line as a winger, which is hard to do. Like, you want your centerman kind of especially on your first line, carrying the weight load, carrying that line. Like, it was Taylor Hall kind of doing it as a winger, and he excelled at it. So
Yeah,
yeah, I think he's a phenomenal pick to have on this list.
Yeah, that's actually a great point because his last season in Edmonton was 15-16, which was the year they drafted McDavid. Then he went to New
So he had
Jersey.
McDavid for 40 games.
Yeah. And
And
then
that's
he
rookie
goes to
McDavid.
New Jersey for 3 years. And so he gets, I don't know if he sure played in his first year of being NHL eligible after drafted, but if he did, that means he played 33 games with them. And he wouldn't have been there at all when Jack Hughes was there. So, and then he goes to Arizona. Who's he playing with there? And then he goes to Boston, which I don't think he went on. I think he was on the second line. So he got to maybe be centered by David Krejci. But even then, that might have been the year Krejci was over in Europe. And now he's in Chicago. So maybe he'll get to play with Bedard.
Really get to play with Bedard. Like, he got injured at the beginning of the year, missed most of the year. Like,
he played 10 games last year. So
I think he's going to do some magic with Bedard next year. Like, the two of them, Teravainen could be. Because I always forgot that, Chicago had Taylor Hall. Or they still do. He was just injured. Yeah, no. I love that you have him on this list. I think he's a guy that, is always kind of felt like underrated. Just on the fact of, it's like, he doesn't put up the points other guys are doing, but like, he's doing it himself. Like, he's the one, kind of carrying the weight load for his line, it seems. So
I think he is one of those guys that falls into a trap of he was a first overall pick. And so anything he does short of game breaking, people are going to be upset with and say that he's not living up to it. Like, he's not Austin Matthews. He's not Connor McDavid, but like, but he's still really good.
I view it through the lens of kind of like, the same with like Nico Hischier, obviously phenomenal defensively.
That's kind of what I was thinking. Yeah.
When I look at Hull, because again, Hull wasn't like a consensus, unanimous, like number one overall pick. That was the year of the whole like Tyler, like who's going to be number one. We didn't know until the day of the draft. And so, people look at it like, oh, he's a first overall pick, but it's like, he could have easily been 2. Like, so that's kind of the way I view it, as like, first overall pick, but he wasn't like that franchise guy, like the guy that was supposed to be like clear above the rest of his draft class and whatnot.
Yeah. And it's funny because we're saying that about a guy who, won a Hart Trophy. Like, there was a year where he was the best guy in the league, at the very least, at the discretion of the voting committee.
No, when he won the Hart that year, I was like, man, that was the right call. Like, it was.
Yeah, that was like, I don't believe he won the Ted Lindsay. I believe was it McDavid that would have won it that year. Like,
I'm not too sure off the top of my head.
Like, that's perfect because, maybe he wasn't the best player in the league that year, but he was definitely most valuable to his team. And that's what the Hart Trophy is.
Yeah, exactly.
But moving on to my number 16 on the list. This guy is the first guy on the list who has no awards at all. And we're not going to get to another one for a decent bit here. Number 16, I have Mitch Marner. Mitch Marner in 576 games, so still almost a full season more than Matthew Tkachuk. 639 points, a plus 110. Obviously he's in Toronto. There's going to be all those playoff talks, but he still has like 50 points in 56 games or something like that. Like, he's just under a point per game in the playoffs. He's a phenomenal talent, and it's looking at his stats, it's kind of insane that he hasn't had a 100-point season yet. He's kind of in that McKinnon zone where he's just knocking on the door, and it's not lining up for him right now. It's going to happen, but it hasn't lined up. He had in 21-22, he had 97 points in 72 games. If he played 3 more games, he probably would have hit it. He had 99 points 2 years ago in 80 games. And last year he had 85 points, but that was in only 69 games. So he could have played another 13. And he very possibly would have hit it there. So he's, at least I believe, around 100-point producer, if you're going by points per game, and that's not even talking about his defensive prowess as well. He's not a very physical guy, but he is a very strong defensive force, almost as much as you can be as a winger. Uh, you know,
Mhm.
Notoriously, the Selke doesn't go to wingers anymore. But if there was a guy in the league as a winger that I think could win it in the next, sometime in the next decade, you know, one of the honorable mentions I said Mark Stone, but other than him, Mitch Marner.
Hey, yeah, I'm right. I'm right there with you. I think that's a great pick to have there. Again, one
Yeah,
of those guys that, yeah, he's in Toronto, and like you mentioned, he's got great playoff numbers, and it's just those few mistakes he makes that kind of, the Toronto media kind of makes that the cloud over top of him, and just labels him with that. But
yeah,
yeah, he's one of those guys that he's going to hit 100 points eventually, and probably when he does, it's going to be like 115. You know, like he's just going to break through that barrier and get there. So
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, that definitely could be this upcoming season. Like he's been due for so long, and who knows where he's going to play this year, or if he plays there the whole year. But uh, yeah, as it stands right now, he's number 16 on my list of wingers since 2010. Number 15 is another guy who has not played uh, a ton of games. He's played a little bit more than one season more than Mitch Marner. That is David Pasternak.
yeah,
Pasternak
I
is,
like that pick. I like that one.
yeah, 674 games, 727 points, plus 141, 348 goals. Reading these stats, I'm wondering if I maybe should have had him a bit higher, but looking at the guys ahead of him, it's a little tough to argue too many spots. But he's got a Rocket Richard trophy to his name. No Stanley Cup, but he does have that individual award, which really helps. Uh,
Mhm.
Easily one of the best goal scorers over the past 5 years in the league. Like, it's hard to say he's the best when Austin Matthews exists, but is it fair to say he's at least got an argument for number two?
I would say he's for sure top three.
Yeah, like
I wouldn't put him lower than three. So you could easily make an argument for two. If he's three, sure, but like he's top three.
yeah, like he's so solid, and especially these past 2 years, almost kind of looking at his stats, almost similar to what we're saying about Marner. He'd never had that 100-point season. He's such a goal scorer, and then 2 years ago, 113 points, 61 goals. Last year, 110 points, 47 goals. Like,
Yeah.
just absolutely broke through in a big way.
And the fact that he
It
proved he can do it without Bergeron.
Yeah, and I was
That's
just gonna
also
say, without
massive.
Patrice Bergeron, even like he got by all metrics better being the guy on his line, which is absolutely insane. But
Yeah.
yeah, he's one of those guys that will, if we were to do this again in the future, he would definitely be higher in my
Yeah.
summation.
Yeah, that's a great pick. And yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, like you said, he's a guy that's only gonna move up. If we do this down the road, like
yeah,
he's not gonna go down this list. He's gonna
yeah.
keep rising.
Um, Number 14 on the list, I have Mikko Rantanen, who has won
Ooh.
Stanley Cup. It was so close between Pasternak and Rantanen. The one thing that put Rantanen over the edge was Colorado's just played more playoff games in that time, so he's had more time to show what he can do in the playoffs, and he's got really solid numbers throughout all those playoff games. And on top of that, obviously, he's got that Stanley Cup win with the Colorado Avalanche. So
Mhm.
uh, yeah, like insanely solid numbers. 16 or 16, 617 points in 570 games, a plus 78, which includes a big minus 25 in that horrible 16-17 year for the Avalanche, which I don't blame him for that number at all. Uh, yeah, he's always been one of those guys that he kind of felt like almost like a playmaking version of Tarasenko to me for a bit, until about 2 years ago when
I
he
see what you mean.
really broke out and went from like elite to like a borderline franchise changing player.
Yeah. Yeah, dude, he's so good. And, as good as Pasternak is, I totally agree that you got to give that slight little edge to Rantanen just because, yeah, man, like, he's such a good player. And another one of those guys that he's only going to move up. Like, he's not moving down this list. So, yeah.
Yeah, and you could definitely say the
I
same
picked
about.
him to put up 60. So,
Yeah, that's
60
true.
goals.
2 years ago, he had 55. So I mean, it's very possible.
He's knocking on the door this year, and he might get through.
Yeah, and another guy who will only be moving up the list in years to come. At number 13, I have Artemi Panarin, whose only trophy is the Calder Trophy in his rookie year. I had a bit more of a rift between him and some of the other current players. Kachuk, Marner, Pasternak, and Rantanen. I had Panarin a bit higher than them. Just looking at his numbers, the rest of them, they came into the league and immediately made an impact. But they came in and made a half point per game or like 0.6 points per game impact. Panarin showed up and immediately dropped 77 points, 30 goals in his first season. And he just has only improved and produced more.
To be fair, he was playing over in the KHL, was a bit older than, he did have
that's
that
fair.
extra experience, whatnot. But I mean,
he's
still,
definitely
like,
older than the other guys.
he did come in and completely, look like a guy that's been doing this for the last 10 years. Like, he just fit in so naturally, and you're watching, you're like, man, this guy's got the confidence of just someone that's been lighting this league up for the last couple years. So
yeah,
and he's only gotten better since then.
Yeah, well, especially in this past year, like, well, Jesus Christ, apparently everyone's doing it now. I figured he had a 100-point season at some point, not until this year where he put up 120 points, 49 goals.
Yeah.
He's got 781 points in 672 games, plus 156. Yeah, like his numbers, especially per game, were just higher than the rest of the currently playing players that I had below him. That I had to put him higher up, even though he doesn't have that the cup like Rantanen or the rocket like Pasternak.
Yeah, no, I'm right there with you on this pick. I think it's he's such a good player. And, like we said, from the time he got in, he's only gotten better. And now we've seen him, 120 points. I mean, yeah.
I mean, that's Matt. It's insane that he put up 49 goals, 120 points. Nobody even considered talking about him for the Hart. Like, we saw such an insane season this year out of so many guys.
Yeah. And he's also one of those guys that, again, he's, as a winger, he makes, everyone around him better. Like, he's always kind of the top guy on his line.
Yeah.
So, I mean, he's played with good players, but he's been, the guy that's relied on to make the magic happen.
Yeah. Number, what are we at? 12. This is a guy that originally I had around 19, maybe 18, and the more I looked at it, I could not bring him up. At number 12 here, I have Jamie Benn, who's notoriously got that one Art Ross trophy in, I want to say 2015.
Sick Art Ross.
Hey, 89 points, people love to dunk on it because 89 points isn't that high, but then how come nobody else put up 89 points, right?
Didn't he also do it by having a 4-point night or something, or a 3-point night?
I think it was I thought it was a 5-point night. It was at least a
probably
4-point night or something.
Probably 4 then.
Like, it was.
I remember he just beat out Tavares for it on the very last night.
Yeah,
he came in and stole it. But hey, you know what? He showed up when it mattered to win it. And
yeah, Tavares should have put up 3 in his final game and secured it. And
yeah, no, you know what? I love having Jamie Benn on here, man. I mean, again, one of the kind of like what I talked about, a guy kind of like Shea Weber, just a great leader, a guy that everybody kind of turns to, and again, in his he's kind of not in his prime anymore, but in his prime, he was fantastic. And again, I love those wingers that can kind of do what he did offensively, but not many guys can throw hands like he does and lay the body he did and still does even.
Yeah, and honestly, one of the reasons that he kept moving up my list so much is that on top of just such consistent production, 907 points over 1,112 games. Those are way higher numbers on both ends than we've talked about so far, really. Uh,
Yeah.
he like he's I thought he fell off more, honestly. The way people talk about him, I kind of got sucked into that trap of thinking that he was a little more cooked than we thought, but like in the past 5 years, he hasn't been bad at all. Like he's not his, former self, the Art Ross winner, but I mean 39 points in 69 games. 35 points in 52. That's only 52 games.
Yeah.
46 and 82, 78 and 82 2 years ago, and then 60 and 82 this year.
Yeah.
We're only 1 year removed from 78 points and 33 goals and 82. He's
Yeah.
he's still doing pretty damn well. So,
And he's
uh
one of those guys, especially this year in the playoffs, like when he was on the ice, you noticed him. He was probably
yeah,
the most noticeable guy on the ice every time he was out there. And when you've
yeah.
got a guy like that, especially in the playoffs, and especially like the teams they were playing as well, like they went through, like they played three just phenomenally great teams with a lot of top end talent, and he was the most noticeable every time he was out there. So that speaks volumes to how effective of a player he is.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And not counting this season, the 2021 season or the 2012-13 season because those were shortened. Just taking a look since 2010, the least games played in a season he had was 69. Nice.
Yeah, nice.
Like he plays a lot of games and
Yeah,
that counts for something.
yeah. No, I honestly didn't think you'd have Jamie Benn on this list. So to see that you have him on here, I that's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. Honestly,
Well
I'm
deserved.
wondering if he should have been a little bit higher. Um honestly, I'm looking a little bit closer at some of these other guys and I think
Yeah,
he probably should have,
I
but
think probably right where he's at, I think is probably a good spot. We'll see. I don't know who else you have yet to come, but I think right where you got him, I think is probably a pretty good spot.
yeah. So we are now no, we are not cracking the top 10 yet. We're at number 11. And at number 11, we have Johnny Gaudreau, whose only trophy is one Lady Bing. He has
Ooh,
743 points in 763 games, including that
jeez.
115 point season in 21-22 with 40 goals plus 64. Good God.
Yeah, that line was unstoppable.
Like they were so
Like,
good. And he also has pretty decent playoff stats too, which definitely help his case. But yeah, Goudreau, one of those guys that almost similar to Panarin, made a huge impact, especially for what was he, a fourth rounder? Like immediately when he came into the league, his first season he had one game played and one goal. Cool. And then the next year, his actual first season, he had 64 points in 80 games, 78 and 79 after that, and he's always hovered around that 90 point mark, that decently over a point per game. Sometimes he dips down a bit, but uh he's for a guy who's so small and drafted later, like he's really carved out a really solid career for himself. I was surprised he hadn't played more games, but he also did start in 2014. But
yeah.
yeah, he's been a
One
playmaking
one
machine.
th- he's got an award too. This is an award I'm giving out. This is a personal award I made.
Oh no.
Um, the I don't know how, but I don't know. I don't have a word for it yet. But the non-hitter award, the guy who plays just absurd amount of time, absurd amount of games, and does not hit.
Yeah,
And
fair
and
enough.
I'm not even exaggerating. All right, Goudreau played 81 games last year. Guess how many hits he had?
I mean,
He played 81 games.
obviously it's got to be lower. You wouldn't be doing this, right? But like,
Mhm.
I don't know, 10.
2.
I want
2
to
years
see.
ago.
I want to see clips of those. I want to see clips of those 2 hits. What were they? Were they nice?
Right? 2 years ago, he played 80 games, 5 hits. And then 3 years ago, his last year at the Flames, where he put up 115 points. He was feeling it that year. 82 games, he had 10 hits there.
Oh, he's a menace. He must be
Like,
stopped.
he's missed 3 games in the last 3 seasons. He has a combined 17 hits. Dude does not like to hit. He does not like to get
No.
in there and mix
And
it
I mean,
up.
if you were, if you're that size playing in the NHL, you probably don't want to a ton unless you're Nathan Gerbe. But you know what? That's
Brad Marchand's like standing right there. Standing right there.
Is Goudreau
licking
that
ya.
tall? As tall as Marchand?
I think they're only off by like an inch. I mean, Marchand's probably got some more weight, but
I think Marchand's 5'11". I don't know. I have no idea what. Goudreau is.
no. Marshy is not 5'11". He's
I-
5'9". So he's an inch
okay,
taller
fair.
than Goudreau. And he's only, I don't know if this is accurate, but he's only 10 pounds heavier. I think
I mean,
Marchand
1
was
inch,
a little
10 pounds.
pretty beefier. I thought Marchand actually had more weight on him. Anyways, yeah, Goudreau, very solid pick.
Yeah.
Like
In hindsight, so we kind of locked in our picks. In hindsight, I probably have Ben above him, but I still don't mind this spot for Johnny.
Yeah, I think it's fine. I got no complaints with how you have him.
Number 10. We're now in the top 10. I have
Top 10.
Gabriel Landeskog,
Oh,
who has a Calder
Mr.
Trophy
LTIR.
and 1 Stanley Cup. 571 points in 738 games. 248 goals plus 78. One of the youngest captains in NHL history.
Is he
Obviously,
the
captained his team to a
youngest?
Stanley Cup.
He might still be the youngest.
I think he might be.
I think he might actually still be the youngest player ever named captain. Could be wrong.
Think so.
He's definitely one of the like 3 youngest, but I think he actually might be the youngest.
Depends when they gave it to McDavid, I suppose.
Yeah.
But yeah, he obviously it hurt him a little bit not playing since his last game was in the 21-22 season.
Okay, he passed Landeskog. McDavid did. So McDavid was, but Landeskog, okay, second. Still incredible.
Still, though. Oh no, McDavid's ahead of you in a stat.
Yeah, right.
But
get used to it, everybody.
But yeah, he's been very solid. He was only trending upward before his big injury, which is really too bad because he could have put up great numbers in those years, especially with the absolute breakout that McKinnon and Makar have both had in the last like 3-4 years. But he's been a solid captain to them, even still not playing in that time. And I do take that into account, maybe not as much as, some of the awards and stuff other guys have, but I do think that is important as well.
I completely agree.
Very consistent play. I would, upon second look, I would probably have Jamie Benn above him as well, but I think Jamie Benn probably doesn't go further than that.
Mm-hmm. And you could make that argument. Definitely could.
I will take Landeskog at number 10.
Yeah,
and hopefully he plays again. It kind of sounds like he might be playing this upcoming season.
I hope.
I don't know,
but so.
I absolutely hope so. Especially since his injury's so wild. I hate watching it, not because it looks brutal, but because it doesn't.
Yeah,
it like really one of those things that just kind of exposes like the fragility of the human body. Like you can take so many body checks and block so many 100-mile-an-hour slap shots, and then just like it doesn't even look like the blade touches him much. It like barely hits his knee on top of a knee pad, and then his knee's just fucked for several years.
Yeah,
wild.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
But moving on to number 9. This is where we're getting juicier. This is where we're getting real solid here. At number 9, I have Jonathan Huberdeau. He has a Calder Trophy to his name, and he, for the past 2 years, has done fairly decently. Obviously not performing up to that contract the contract extension he signed in Calgary, but Over his career, 720 points in 831 games. Dude is an assist machine. This guy loves dishing the puck, including that 21-22 season where he had 85 assists for 115 points. Best offensive season in NHL history by a left winger, if I'm not mistaken. I guess that might have. Where does Panarin play? That might have been broken this year, or maybe it was just assists. Actually, might have been most assists in a season at 85.
I think it was just assists. Yeah,
but nonetheless, this dude. I mean, he played 10 seasons in Florida on an abysmal Florida team. Like the Battle
Yeah.
of Florida is only a thing now because they're good. And even in those 10 years, not playing with really anybody of note other than Barkov, once Barkov started breaking out, he still ended up being their franchise leader for like points, assists. Like he might have even had games played. Like he did a lot in his 10 years there, and he's always one of those guys I've really liked, and I don't like that he finally started breaking out and then he got traded, and he's been performing not up to that same level. It's really too bad because he's one of those guys that feels easy to cheer for. So I'm hoping this year he really pulls it back with the Flames.
Yeah, I mean, yes, kind of looking at him, you kind of maybe just tune out those last 2 years, but everything else up until that point, like
it's really just the contract. Even 55 points in 79 games, 52 and 81. Like that's not horrible. Obviously, that's not what you. Yeah, it's not what you traded for. But,
no, exactly. Yeah.
It's similar to Goudreau. Funny enough, the way people talk like he's absolutely washed, and then you look and it's like, well, he's still playing good hockey. He's just not. He's not him right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. But while he was on Florida, especially those last 2 or 3 years, when everyone was saying Barkov's one of the most underrated guys in the league, my response was always Barkov's not even the most underrated guy on his line, because I think Huberdeau was one of the most underrated guys.
Always underrated. Yeah.
Number 8. Now we're getting to guys that I all feel very, very solidly about. I think every guy from here on out, what they've already accomplished, could at least warrant a conversation about the Hall of Fame.
Okay.
So at number 8, I have none other than Blake Wheeler. This dude started so low on my list, and he just kept moving up. And I just kept re-looking at him and going, no, yeah, he's just better than that guy. He's got to go up too. He's got 898 points, 300 goals in 1,091 games since 2010.
Just back 91 point seasons, I remember, with Winnipeg, which was just nuts. Like,
yeah.
The fact that he was able to do it 2 years in a row, like, and that wasn't actually. Well, it was a decent Winnipeg team. It wasn't like anything phenomenal, but it was still a solid team. But like, he again, a guy that kind of always was a little bit underrated because he never played in most of his prime was with kind of Winnipeg, and so it was like, he wasn't in a big market where he got a lot of attention on him, but he was very solid and just great at what he did for such a long period of time as well.
Yeah, he's just been so consistent. Never had 100-point season, but several 60 points, 70-point seasons, a couple 90-point seasons in there, like you mentioned. He's just starting to fall off now with the Rangers this past year. He put up 21 points in 54 games. But
which is still good considering he was getting like third, fourth line minutes.
Yeah, that's just age catching up with them and the time on ice. A team change in the twilight of his career, but
he's cup chasing. He's not going somewhere where he can be the guy. He's going somewhere he's like, I just want to get a ring.
Yeah, and New York's definitely a good place to try and do that right about now. But just 2 points shy of 900 points. He's put up very solid numbers over that amount of time, and almost 1,100 games played. You need somebody to play games for your team.
Yeah.
He is one of the only other players on my list that has no individual awards. Moving on to number 7, we have Brad Marchand, who has won Stanley Cup.
Yeah. Yeah. I was wondering when he was coming.
I struggled to
he
place
needed
him.
to be up here.
I struggled to place him for a good while because he was, good, but he was not elite for quite a bit in his career there.
It wasn't really until like
Very
what was it,
solid, but
2016?
yeah,
The World
16,
Cup of
17.
Hockey is like, he played with Crosby and Bergeron. That was like, holy shit, look at Marchand go. And then all of a sudden, like right then, like,
He just
something
never
just
turned it
changed.
off.
And he's just been an absolute animal and a beast for his size, even, which makes even more incredible ever since then. Like, he's been a consistent top winger in the league ever since then. So,
Yeah, like
and hasn't fallen off yet.
looking at his stats here, he had, 55 points, 36, 53, 42, all pretty solid numbers and overwhelming pluses, plus 31, plus 23, plus 36. But then that 16, 17 year hit and just 85 points, 85, 100 points, 87, 69 and 53, 80 points, 67 in the last 2 years. Dude is a plus 292 in his career. That is absolute
Right.
insanity in this modern NHL. And yeah, 929 points in 1,029 games, just over 400 goals at 401. Yeah, the sheer contrast of before and after that 2016 season, I really didn't know where to place him, but eventually I landed on this number 7 spot, and his playoff numbers and that Stanley Cup definitely help as well.
Yeah. I knew he was going to be high on this list somewhere because that's probably where I would have put him. So I've got, great player, and I mean everything that he's done kind of speaks for itself.
Yeah, I feel like some people would argue he could even be 1, 2, or 3 spots higher, but I think it's one of those situations like we were talking about on the defense list where the next few could probably be interchanged with each other a lot.
Yeah, no, I'm right there with you. So I'm curious to see now who the other guys are that are above here on the list now.
Yeah. Next, we have the only remaining person on the entire list who does not have a single award, and that is Joe Pavelski at number 6.
As soon as you said that, I was like, all right, there he is. Yeah. I mean,
yeah, he has
the amount of like stats are just absurd. Recently retired Joe Pavelski as well.
Congratulations to him on that. It is now official. 941 points over 1,124 games, 418 goals, plus 191, as well as insane playoff stats as well. Pavelski is one of I think the playoff stats, despite him not having the Stanley Cup, I think Pavelski's playoff stats is what put him over top of Marchand for me, which is funny because Marchand was very good in the playoffs as well. But what are his stats here? He's got just over 120 points in the playoffs in 263 games. Not 200, 163 games. Great numbers throughout the playoffs. So many playoff games played as well. That's a massive sample size. And
some of the best set of hands when it comes to deflecting pucks.
Oh, absolutely.
So I only know this because I was reading a thing about Pavelski's retirement not the other day.
Yeah.
But among all 7th round picks all time, he's number 1 in goals and number 2 in points. Which
for 7th rounder?
Yeah.
Who's number 1? Would that be Zetterberg?
I'm not too sure off the top of my head.
I wasn't sure if you'd remember. I don't know if that's right either. I can't remember if Zetterberg was 7th or like a 10th round pick, but
and as a 7th round pick, he's the only forward in NHL history to have 1,000 hits, 1,100 blocks, and 700 takeaways. So, when you look at his offensive numbers, and they're great, but then you also look at the amount of hits he's dishing out, the amount of takeaways, the block shots, just super solid career. So many games played over that time.
Uh, yeah, like I said, I definitely think we're at the point where we're talking about a lot of guys who are either have a very strong bid or are going to be in the Hockey Hall of Fame based on what they've already done. Not even talking about what they could keep doing. Obviously, Pavelski is now retired, but I think he has a very strong case, and so does everyone above him as well.
Yeah. So the four or yeah the only forward, the only seventh round pick who's got more points than Pavelski is Doug Gilmour.
I mean, if there's one guy to beat you on a list, that's not a bad name.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Like so, up there with some elite talent.
Yeah.
Yeah. No. Great pick. What are we? Are we in the top 5 now?
We are now entering the top 5. We are
Oh,
at
we're in the
number
top
5.
5. I'm just trying to think of who's still left. I know 2 guys for sure. I might be. I'm blanking on a couple. I can only think of 2 off the top of my head.
The top 3 are, I think, very solid. I think, like your list, it's very hard to move those 3. The other 2 could probably be moved around in somewhere in the top 10, but I feel pretty solid about where I put them.
Jeez, I'm trying to think of who else. All right. More coming to me now. Okay, all right, I'm ready to hear him.
Yeah.
Who's 5?
Number 5, I have Corey Perry.
I was gonna say Corey Perry's got to be there. Yeah,
Yeah, with 1 Hart Trophy and 1 Rocket Richard Trophy as well. Corey Perry has just had such an insane career. How many points does he have? 710 points in 1,025 games for 338 goals in the past, what is that, 14 seasons. He's played so many games, especially in the playoffs. Dude is just terminally going to the finals now, which
yeah,
is crazy. But yeah, he just does everything needed of him, regardless of what team he's on. He's moved around so much at the end of his career here, and he just is consistently producing however they need him to. What does he have here? Like, yeah, 215 playoff games played,
yeah.
127 points.
Jeez.
Like,
Yeah, and in his prime, like he was a beast with the Ducks.
yeah,
Like,
and obviously I am basing, a lot of it is about how good he was then, but
yeah, in his
also,
prime.
so much playoff. I guess I don't know if you want to call it playoff success, putting up great numbers in the playoffs if you don't win the cup, but a lot of those mid 2010 years, he's putting up great numbers. 10 goals for 18 points in 16 playoff games, 11 points in 17, 11 points in 13, 14, 13. Like, he was putting up a lot of points in the playoffs, and uh, you know, is he carrying these teams to the finals? Maybe not, but there's something to be said for going to the finals this many years. And what is it, like 4 times in the last 5 years?
Yeah, 4 times in the last 5 years. Yeah, he's had a hell of a career, and obviously re-signed with Edmonton, so he's got more left to prove here.
Yeah. Coming in at number 4, I have Phil Kessel.
Yeah, yeah,
I
man, he was good.
I was really not sure where to put Phil Kessel at the start of this. Um, he's got 866 points in 1,064 games, 347 goals. He's played for quite a few teams, but those 3 Stanley Cups is pretty big. Arguably, should have had a Conn Smythe in there as well in one of the
Yeah,
years in Pittsburgh. Uh, dude has just been a beast, especially a goal scoring machine. An Iron Man, as we know him as now.
yeah,
Yeah, he's put up great stats over his career, as well in the playoffs. 83 points, 100 in 100 playoff games. Uh, dude just has success everywhere he goes, and one of the most consistent guys in the league over the past 14 years.
Yeah, I have absolutely no. I totally forgot about Phil Kessel. I got no complaints with you having him this high. He consistently has always just been a terrific goal scorer, and like you said, the 3 Stanley Cups is absolutely massive. And yet, probably should have had a Conn Smythe on top of one of them. But
Yeah. And, looking at some of his stats that were already really good in Toronto, he was playing on bad teams in Toronto
yeah,
there. The fact that he was putting up 37
bad
goals,
teams.
82 points, 37 goals, 80 points, 32 goals, 64 points, like nobody should be putting that up on how bad some of those Toronto teams were. So I
Yeah,
yeah, it's easy to be a Phil Kessel fan,
yeah, exactly. Right.
but yeah, I
Very
think
very well deserved to be on this
I think
list.
those last four you could probably interchange a lot of them if you wanted. Kessel, Perry, Pavelski, and Marchand. I think I think there's a lot of debate to be had there, but that's
Yeah,
the ranking I ended on.
those are all very solid to have right in there. And yeah, you can make the argument for any one of them, and it'd be a valid argument. So
And this top three, I think it's pretty hard to argue anybody other than these top three in these spots.
mhm.
Um, as soon as you get to this top three, my notes for them are getting a bit longer because there's much more individual hardware to announce for each one of them. But for number three since 2010, I have Nikita Kucherov. 2 Art Ross
Oh, okay.
trophies, 1 Hart Trophy, 1 Lindsay, and 2 Stanley Cups. Uh, for my money, has the highest peak of any player we're going to talk about, at least on the wingers list today. Uh, this season, especially. I mean, 144 points is just absolute madness in this day and age.
Yeah.
873 points over 725 games since 2010. 320 goals, a plus 135. And his playoff stats are also just incredibly staggering. He's going to be one of those guys that people look back on in like 20 years and they're going like, how on earth does this man not have a Conn Smythe? Like
Yeah.
34 points in a single playoff run. Next year, 32. Next year, 27. And there was just other guys who got them instead, which was valid, but it feels weird.
Yeah.
167 points in 147 playoff games. Like
Yeah. Well, and there's still time
being
for him
well,
to maybe get one though.
there
Doors not closed for him to get one.
definitely is for sure, but uh, yeah, well over a point per game in the playoffs and out. He has quite a few less games played than the guys above him on this list, which was ultimately the deciding factor. I did, obviously, as a Lightning fan, want to have him at 1 or 2, but it just wouldn't have felt too genuine considering he started playing in the league in 13-14 when the other guys were hitting their peak in 2010, and they've just got
Yeah.
those extra games in hand, as well as Kucherov also didn't play at all in the regular season during the 2021 year. So
Yeah.
yeah, he had to come in at number three, but I definitely think he could get to number two or even number one if we were to do this again in 5 years. But it kind of depends how he produces and what the other two guys do uh, from now until then.
Yeah. Yeah. I thought I thought he was gonna be number 2 on your list, so now I'm unsure of who number 2. Because I'm pretty sure I know who one's gonna be, but I'm curious on who 2 is. I think I must be blanking on someone.
I feel like you're probably thinking my number one is my number two, if I had to
Well, we'll
guess,
see.
but we'll have to see. Uh, in number two, in the second spot for wingers since 2010, I have Alexander Ovechkin.
Oh,
He
fuck,
has
yeah, I totally forgot about Ovechkin. Yeah, there he
he
is.
had. Oh, you
That's
forgot
when
about
I
Ovechkin.
that's when I forgot about, honestly. I don't know
He
how.
he's got 7 Rocket trophies, 1 Hart, 1 Lindsay, 1 Conn Smythe, and 1 Stanley Cup. Uh,
Yeah.
since
It's a great 8.
yeah, like he's. I mean, the 7 Rocket Richards tells you a lot of what you need to know.
Yeah.
Since 2010, he has 1,021 points in 1,030 games, just under a point per game. but 584 goals in that time.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, you got to score a lot of goals to win 7 Rockets. That's
Well,
not
and
including,
he's
and that's
about to
not
be the
including the
all-time
ones
goals leader.
before. Yeah,
Like,
like
yeah.
yeah, he's got just massive counting numbers. The 7 Rockets do huge work for him as well. And he still does pretty solidly in the playoffs, almost scoring in the playoffs exactly at that same rate. He's got just over 110 points in just under 125 games played in the playoffs. So he's almost about a point per game. 60 goals in that time as well. So still putting up a lot of goals.
And instrumental to Washington's cup win as well. Like,
do you think he should have won the Conn Smythe that year?
who won it that year?
He. Oh, sorry. No, he did. Do you think he?
Oh yeah.
Do you think he deserved to?
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
Okay, because he did have 27 goals, or not 27 points, 15 goals in their 24 games.
Yeah.
I didn't follow that playoff specifically super closely, and I know everyone was talking about Holtby, and I wasn't sure of his numbers. So
Holtby was good, Kuznetsov was good, but like when you watch Ovechkin, it was like, man, like he was driving the bus for that team still. Like everything was still kind of happening through him. He was just a lot of big goals and big moments. Like no, I thought Ovi was the right choice.
Okay, yeah. If you don't watch and then you just hear like the captain or like, a guy like that, you kind of wonder if it's like, are they just giving it to him because it's a feels good, he finally got his cup kind of thing, or, did he pop off? And I mean, looking at the stats, that it definitely checks out. Yeah, I mean, 584 goals in the last 14 seasons, unreal.
Yeah. Just incredible stuff from him. And yeah, like we're talking about, he's going to go down as the all-time goals leader. So even though I forgot about him for a brief second, like you got to have him on this list. And I mean, you can make the argument for him 1, but 2, I mean, that's totally fine because, the other guy we're going to talk about, who I'm assuming is your number 1, is.
Well, I didn't leave him off the list.
Yeah.
Of course, number 1, for the top 20 wingers since 2010, I have Patrick Kane. 1,142 points in 1,068 games. I believe that's the most points I've mentioned so far. One of the highest games played totals as well. 425 goals in that time. 3 Stanley Cups, 1 Art Ross, 1 Hart Trophy, 1 Ted Lindsay, and 1 Conn Smythe.
Beast in that year that he won the Art Ross and the Hart. Like he was just going on an incredible tear that year. Like,
yeah.
I remember that year. That 15, year was 16? Nuts. I believe so. Yeah.
46 goals and 106 points. Like,
yeah, he was.
That's especially for the time, that was huge because I mean that was a year before that. The Art Ross went to Jamie Benn with, what was it,
86, 87? Yeah, like
so. That was a nice jump up, and he's also absolutely no slouch in the playoffs either. 138 points in 143 games. I mean, he also got that 1 Conn Smythe, 3 Stanley Cups, do huge lifting. He's just was so good. He's been consistently good the entire time, but especially that stretch from about 2010 to 2016. He was one of the best players in the world, and he still plays at a very high level. I mean, this past season, 47 points in 50 games for the Red Wings after not playing for the first almost half of the year. So he's still got it, and he's 35 now, but he's got to drop off at some point. I think he's got a couple more years before he really starts to drop off, but. Yeah, for my money, it was pretty close with the top 3. Kucherov just didn't quite have the games played to be right there with the other guys. I do think at the rate he's playing, I think, depending on how much you value goals, I guess you can argue whether or not he cracks 2-1. I definitely think he can the way he played last season, but it's always tough to tell, especially with guys
It's very possible.
this
Like
game
it's the
breaking
thing.
skill. Like
Yeah.
these guys have all been so good in the past, and they're not old enough yet that like I wouldn't be super shocked if Kane, his line got hot, he got hot, he could go out there and put up another 100-point season. Ovechkin can go put up
Yeah.
another 40, 45 goals. Kucherov could put up 150 points next year. Like we have no idea what these guys are going to do next. So I think very much like your list, I think that top 3 there is in any order you put it, I think is very valid. I think at
100%.
least 7,
Fair.
if not 8 of the guys in the top 10 there are going to be in the Hall of Fame. Yeah, this was a lot of fun to put together.
It was a lot of work. Like
it was a lot more work
went
than I
into this,
expected.
but yeah, I think you did a great job on it. Like there's again, it's like you could maybe swap one guy with the other and like just have them they're right beside each other. But overall, like I think that's a good list there, and I really don't have any complaints about how you constructed that one all by yourself there.
When after looking at some of the stats again, I think I'd put Jamie Benn up from 12. I think I'd put him ahead of Goudreau, Landeskog, maybe even Huberdeau. I think I'd probably have him at 9 there and move. Yeah, Huberdeau, Landeskog,
And I love
Goudreau
Jamie
down
Benn,
1.
so
But
I'd be okay with that.
Other than that, looking over it, I didn't really have too many regrets or anything like that. So
it's what we're about here. No regrets. That's our favorite thing to say in the whole world. But yeah, so that kind of wraps up, top defensemen, top wingers since 2010. Will we come back at some point? I don't know. We haven't fully discussed. We might be back next week on Tuesday with the centerman and the goalie, or maybe it'll be next Friday. We're not too sure yet, but
kind of
if you guys got
what goes on in the off season, or what people want to see. Maybe people want to see episodes like this, and then also covering more recent stuff on another one. So maybe we'll do like a regular episode and a shorter one later, and kind of split those up. Or maybe we'll just do one a week for a bit here during the off season. We'll have to
we'll kind of play by
get a little
ear
feedback on it,
see what goes on. Yeah.
But yeah, I did like doing this, and I think, especially with more prep time to do in the future, I think there's a very good chance we'll end up doing it again for goalies and centermen since 2010.
Yeah, we'll definitely get around to them at some point. Yeah, again, off season, we're kind of just going as we feel, because again, we really don't have much news to talk about, so we do got to find stuff to talk about. And you guys can always let us know if you enjoy this kind of stuff, or again, what you want to see us do during the off season. And you can do that by checking in on any of our socials. SEU Hockey. Come say hi. Come let us know what you want to see. We're on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. So come throw us a follow. Come shoot us a message, and come talk all things hockey with us over here.
Yeah, I mean, on a whim, we just decided to rip an almost 2-hour episode just talking about ranking hockey players over the last 14 seasons, because it's just fun to talk about hockey. So if you guys feel the same way, do not be afraid to talk hockey back at us, even if you're just screaming it at us.
Yeah, we're just guys being dudes over here, just reminiscing on older players in the league and some of the best, and we had fun doing it. We hope you guys enjoyed it too. But that does wrap up everything we have for this episode this week. We really, really hope you guys enjoyed, and we'll see you guys later next week.